miracles by the wonderful John Mundy, Dr. John Mundy. He is terrific. And I have met him once or twice at a conference or two. And he is truly a terrific human being. So last time we were reading from chapter 6, the dynamics of the ego. And my previous reading, we were discussing the dynamics of the ego and how it plays into our concept of being separate from God, and what the ego plays a big part in our perception of our separation from God, because without an ego, we do not have an individual self. We actually are one with God, and we don't have an individual identity. The ego tells us we have an individual identity, and I'm this person and you're that person, and those people over there are different from us. And the idea of separation plays into every aspect of the world of illusions. So last week, or excuse me, I've been missing for 2 weeks. So the last reading I did, we were getting into anger and attack. These are very serious issues with the ego, because without anger and attack, there's no point in the separation. And when you study the Course long enough, you realize that anger and attack are pointless and have no basis in the reality, our reality with God. So anger and attack are the primary ways in which we project. To the extent to which we value guilt, and we all value guilt, we believe that attack is justified. The ego loves to be right. The Course asks us, however, if we would rather be right or happy. Anger is the means by which we refuse to acknowledge our own guilt and our own responsibility. We then say, the problem is not in me, it's in you. And that makes me angry and gives me the right to attack you. What I attack in you is the sin I see inside me. Otherwise, I could not attack. A student asked a Zen master, how can I cure my terrible temper? Show it to me, demanded the master. I can't just show it to you like that because it comes up unexpectedly, explained the student. The master replied, then it is not your true nature. If it were, it would be with you at all times. Attack cannot occur without judgment, and anger is never justified. The word is never, not sometimes. The ego would love it if the Course said that anger was sometimes justified. Then we could have debates about the times it was and the times it is not justified. This does not mean we should never get angry. It just means I have slipped into fear. Something has gone wrong with my thinking, and I need another way to look at things. The defense of atonement. The atonement is correction or undoing. It is the only defense the ego did not make. It is God's plan, parentheses, curriculum, for salvation through forgiveness, letting go of that which we are projecting or are holding on to. Atonement is a practical process for releasing the ego's belief in separation. It is, in fact, the awareness that the separation never happened. It cannot be used destructively. It cannot fail. It can, however, be refused. If I have a gold chain or maybe a headset cord which has become tangled with knots and I have to undo the mess, I reverse the process by which the knots occurred. The undoing may occur quickly, or if the knots are tight and seem complicated, it may be necessary to work for a long time on just one little section. And then suddenly, when that section is undone, a whole length comes out. If I succeed in undoing all the knots in a gold chain and I get down to the end, I find there is nothing there. So it is in my mind. There is nothing there unless we think that there is something there. As Shakespeare's Hamlet says it, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. In like manner, as the ego is undone, we find there was nothing there to start with. The ego really is nothing. It never was anything. How can nothing become something? For this reason, there is nothing to forgive unless we think there is. Take jealousy, for example. Jealousy can only occur if I think that something has been taken away from me, that I have been deprived of love. Some little kinky thing happened and I let it become a knot in my thinking. A student in one of our course meetings brought the following illustration to the group. His daughter was getting married. He was now divorced from his daughter's mom. She had now remarried, and so had he. At the wedding, no one picked up the microphone to acknowledge him as the father of the bride. He got so upset that he left the wedding. He left his daughter's wedding. He got into his car and started to drive. He was soon insane with anger and rage. And then a miracle happened. He realized what he was doing. He had slipped into a temporary state of insanity. He reversed his thinking. It did not matter if he was recognized as the father of the bride or not, or it mattered only in his egoistic mind, and he could let that go. What mattered was the love he felt for his daughter. He turned the car around, went back to the wedding, and apologized to his daughter for having left. Love prevailed. Forgiveness prevailed. He had a dance with his daughter, and all was well. The sole responsibility of God's teacher is to accept the atonement for himself. Atonement means correction or the undoing of errors. When this has been accomplished, the teacher of God becomes a miracle worker by definition. His sins have been forgiven him, and he no longer condemns himself. How can he then condemn anyone? And who is there whom his forgiveness can fail to heal? Reversing our thinking. By offering complete forgiveness to everyone, including ourselves, we undo guilt. Miracles are part of a chain of undoing. We may think of what happened with Adam and Eve as a reversal in thinking. The natural, miraculous state of mind was lost, and an artificial, though seemingly very real, perspective was adopted. What is needed then is a reversal in thinking in order to bring us back home to God. If I had a world of my own, everything would be nonsense. Nothing would be what it is, because everything would be what it isn't. And contrary wise, what it is wouldn't be, and what it wouldn't be, it would. You see, that's a quote from Alice in Alice in Wonderland. An experimental psychologist, G.M. Stratton, made glasses for himself in which the world was inverted upside down and backward. He wore the glasses constantly and eventually learned to live in a contrary-wise, upside-down, backward world. He could write, eat, dress, literally do everything upside down and backward. He even got to the point where he forgot that he was living in an upside-down, backward world. When he took the glasses off, the world was again, of course, inverted and backward, and he had to learn how to live in this world all over again. What we are familiar with, we cease to see. French author Anais Nin. It does not occur to us that we are seeing ourselves backward when we look into a mirror, unless we're wearing a name badge. Then it is clear something is amiss. Either everything is backward or our perception is backward. In a similar way, the ego does a psychological inversion of reality that is completely backward, but we don't see it. We think that this world is real and heaven is a fantasy. It's the other way around. Heaven is reality and the world is a dream. Complexity is of the ego and is nothing more than the ego's attempt to obscure the obvious. A Course in Miracles. Lesson 11 from the workbook. My meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world, is a beginning step in the reversal of our thinking process. It seems as if the world determines what we perceive. It's the other way around. Our thoughts determine the world we perceive. It would be so nice if something would make sense for a change. Alice in Wonderland. A reversal in thinking is called for, as it is, for example, in understanding forgiveness. As we forgive, so are we forgiven. The ego does not understand forgiveness and thus twists it into something it is not, making the other wrong and then forgiving them for our projection in is backward thinking. We resist the atonement and the process of the Course as we are blinded by our own reflection. We've been looking at the world so long through a glass darkly that all we see is the ego's reflection. Denial of error is a strong defense of truth, but denial of truth results in miscreation, the projections of the ego. A Course in Miracles. Extension, the correct form of projection. Fortunately for every defense of the ego, the Holy Spirit has an alternative defense which cannot harm. In fact, it can only heal. The positive use of denial means that we deny the denial of truth, and we assert that only the truth can be true. Only heaven is true. A dream is never reality. What we deny is the ego's whole thought system and its seeming truth. We deny the belief that we can be hurt by error. Jesus goes to the cross without attacking those who have misperceived and therefore persecuted him. He does not amplify or make the error real. The Course calls upon us to deny any belief that error can hurt us. When a child is helped to translate his ghost into a curtain, his monster into a shadow, and his dragon into a dream, he is no longer afraid and laughs happily at his own fear. A Course in Miracles. While the ego projects to exclude and therefore to deceive the Holy Spirit, the extension of love sees only oneness. As the Course expresses it, the great peace of the kingdom shines in your mind forever, but it must shine outward to make you aware of it. As I extend love, so do I come to know what love is. The ego is depression, and the more I am trapped or caught or locked within my own mind, the greater is my isolation and despair. Depression is isolation and the inescapable consequence of separation. God, who encompasses all being, created beings who have everything individually, but who want to share it to increase their joy. Nothing real can be increased except by sharing. That is why God created you. Divine abstraction takes joy in sharing. A Course in Miracles. Chapter 7, The Undoing of Guilt. Our way out of fear. Our way out of fear. What else but sin could be the source of guilt, demanding punishment and suffering? And what but sin could be the source of fear, obscuring God's creation, giving love the attributes of fear and of attack? A Course in Miracles. The moment Adam's eyes are opened and he distinguishes between good and evil, guilt comes into his mind. Now, there are two possibilities, one right, one wrong. Now there is division. There is separation. There is judgment. There is guilt. Never wholly present, sin is always a judgment about a past event. Never wholly present, sin is always a judgment about a past event. It may have been 5 minutes ago or 5,000 years ago. It is still past. Guilt is self-accusation. It is my experience in the moment, and fear is my dread of possible punishment. If I feel guilty, it means I have sinned. And if I have sinned, that means that I now feel separate from God, from wholeness. I am isolated and alone and fearful that God will reprimand me for what I have done. As the mind is split, there are two possible memories for the mind. I can wallow in my ego's past, a place of error and wrong decisions, and thus a place of guilt, separation, and division. Or I can return my mind to the memory of the truth of being in God, a place in which there is no division or separation, only love, only God. Memory is selective. If we did not want the ego, if we did not desire its effect, if we did not want to be separate from God, we would not wander into guilt. There is really one problem, and that is the mind's decision for separation, division, individuality, aloneness, and isolation. The decision for separation is the bringer of guilt. The world but demonstrates an ancient truth. You will believe that others do to you exactly what you think you did to them. But once deluded into blaming them, you will not see the cause of what they do because you want the guilt to rest on them. How childish is the petulant device to keep your innocence by pushing guilt outside yourself, but never letting go. A Course in Miracles. The miracle reverses projection. Seeing that projection makes perception, we place ourselves in a position where we can choose once again. This time from a position of mindfulness, capital M, sanity, instead of mindlessness, insanity. The insanity is that I am choosing the ego when I could be choosing peace instead. I do not try to change the world. I rather change my mind about the world. Mindlessness sees sin. Mindfulness sees oneness. We see guilt's shadow all around us, and we don't realize that it is inside. It's in my own mind. And if I see it in a brother, then I am projecting that guilt outward from my mind onto my brother. Thus, it is when I condemn my brother that I condemn myself. And I see us both in hell. If I release, forgive my brother, we are both set free. Choose once again if you would take your place among the saviors of the world, or would remain in hell and hold your brothers there. A Course in Miracles. If on my brother's sins I dwell, I seek to send us both to hell. If I forgive, I am set free, and again I know eternity. Sin is the belief in separation or the idea of evil. It is a lack of love. When we read the word sin in the Course, we can use the word separation instead. When we read separation, we can use the word sin. Sin is the belief that it is possible to do something against God. A man went to church without his wife. When he returned home, she asked him what the preacher talked about. He said sin. Well, said the wife, what did he have to say about it? He's against it, said the husband. Traditional Christianity has always been against sin. Sin means taking the ego seriously. Sin is precious to the ego, so much so that the ego seeks out sin to provide testimony to its reality. The word sin, as Jesus uses it in the New Testament, means missing the mark. That's interesting. Or missing the point. Being centered means being in focus. Being egocentric, we place our focus on who we think we are rather than who we are in truth. Sin is a strictly individual perception, seen in the other, yet believed by each to be within himself. The more easily I see sin in myself, the more it is projected outward, the more real it seems, the more power it also seems to have over me. There is, the ego says, plenty of sin. Just look around. Sin is sacred to the ego. It is, in fact, the most holy concept in the ego's system. Believing in sin, good and bad, and right and wrong, makes judgment necessary. Guilt is the psychological experience of the belief in sin and can be defined as the total of all our negative thoughts, feelings, and beliefs about ourselves. Dr. Kenneth and Gloria Wapnick in Awaken from the Dream. Guilt is the belief we have sinned. It is the preserver of time. It is any negative thought we have about ourselves. It is a painful feeling, emotion, or thought which arises when we believe we have hurt the whole or oneness, including ourselves. Guilt manifests as contempt of self, incompleteness, failure, indifference, despair, depression, and loneliness. It is the idea that we can think apart from God. Without the ego, there would be no guilt. Without guilt, there would be no ego. If I am feeling guilty, I can be sure that the ego is in charge because only the ego can feel guilty. The purpose of the ego is to keep us guilty. Guilt is an invention of my own mind, which means that guilt and salvation are in the same place. Guilt is a decision within my mind. Not being guilty means not being invested in the ego. Guilt is a sure sign that your thinking is unnatural. Unnatural thinking will always be attended with guilt because it is the belief in sin. Unconscious guilt. My mother, Millie, passed on Christmas Day 2001 at the age of 85. We were talking on the phone one day when she was about 80 years old, and she said she felt guilty. I said, "About what, Mama?" She was, as far as I knew, the embodiment of innocence and the most loving person I had ever known. She said, "I don't know. It's just a feeling." I think Mother's guilt was the anxiety everyone feels about the wrongness of feeling separated, and therefore ego-driven. There is no one that has not struggled or is not now struggling with guilt. We have all lied, been thoughtless, and condemning of others. We have each been selfish, pushy, arrogant, and rude. We have lost our tempers and cheated at a game and on our taxes, thereby experiencing separation from the one we cheated on or lied to. We do things in secret and pray that no one will find out. We have forgotten who we are. We have misidentified ourselves as abandoned, unloved, unlovable, alone, and vulnerable. And we see each other as antagonists, adversaries, and enemies. When you maintain that you are guilty, but the source of your guilt lies in the past, you are not looking inward. The past is not in you. Guilt is self-attack, and it is always insane. To get rid of it, We project it out, and when we project it, we cannot then be free of it. Guilt never finds its home in the present. It is always about the past. While there is no eternal hell, the experience of guilt is the now moment in hellish. It keeps me from awareness of wholeness and heaven. Guilt comes in relationship to our bodies, each other, and time. It is, after all, through the body that I experience separation from other bodies. Guilt often arises around indulgence of the body in eating, illness, smoking, sexuality, alcohol, and drugs, to name a few. It is essential that error be not confused with sin. And it is this distinction that makes salvation possible. For error can be corrected and the wrong made right. But sin, were it possible, would be irreversible. I am going to stop there because it is time to pay a visit to my mom, who is having surgery next Tuesday. We're just going to go over a few of the pre-surgical instructions, and I'm going to bring her some food. So thank you so much, and it was a pleasure being with you. I just love John Mundy and his writing, and I'm actually listening to this on Audible as well. John Mundy is a great narrator too, just to let you know. And if you want to grab his book on Audible, it is Living a Course in Miracles, an essential guide to the classic text. Thank you so much. And I will be with you all again next Friday. Bye for now.
Bye, Lydia. Thank you so much. And yeah, I will post all that information so people can go and get that. I have that Audible book as well, and I really enjoy listening to John. He has such a great sense of humor, and he's very dry in the way he presents. He's not, he's uh, sort of like Bob Newhart kind of the way. I mean, you just you listen to him and then you get the joke and it's oh my gosh, he is so funny. Anyway, thank you so much, Lydia Houston, and we will see you next week on time. Once again, apologizing for the miscommunication. Anyway, see you next week. Have fun with your mom, and I'm